I won't be able to talk now.
Tell us about your one-room schoolhouse.
There were 18 students in the 2 years that I went there, first and second grades. And we really learned a lot because when I was in the first grade, every day, each class, 1 through 8, would have to go before the teacher, and whether it was arithmetic or geography or whatever it was. But us little ones were sitting down there hearing it all. So we learned. And, when springtime came, we looked forward to, the teacher would, if it was warm enough, she would allow us to have our class out under a big oak tree. We'd go out and sit in the grass.
The tree's probably still there.
And we would meet for our class, just like as if we were sitting in the school.
Tell me about the ice skating again.
Well, in the wintertime, we enjoyed skating on it. We didn't have skates, we just used our shoes. And if the ice was too thin and we broke through the ice, we'd have a cold, wet foot. And the teacher got sick of it, and she was really on us to stay off of that ditch. But we outfoxed her. If anybody fell through, they'd go to one of the houses that was there by, and we'd take our shoes and socks off, and the lady of the house would put them in front of the coal stove, and they'd be dry in just a few minutes. We'd go back to school, and the teacher never knew we fell in. I remember one time my daddy, he was on the school board, and all through that school year we'd see bees, and the men knew that there were a lot of honeybees, I guess under the outer boards. There were honeybee nests.
In the school building?
In the school building. And so one Saturday, several of the parents got together, and they said, we're going down to the school and get rid of those bees because one of those kids is going to get stung. And they took big, what they called them, lard buckets. And I can remember Daddy coming home. He said he had several stings, but he had a
bunch of honey.
I think it was a 10-gallon. It was
10 gallons of honey.
Big.
Oh my.
Full of honey. Of course, it had the comb in it too. It wasn't pure honey. I mean,
I never heard her say that.
Yeah, Daddy did that.
Well, I believe it.
And also something of interest. If it happened to start snowing during the school hours, and we kids were all at school, Daddy would come to the schoolhouse with a horse pulling what they called a mud boat.
Sled.
It was a
big, heavy sled.
It was made out of wood, and it had wood as runners, and the horses would pull it, and he'd come to the school to pick us up and the Wymans, because they lived just up the road. He picked Dick and Marlon and Charles and I, and Teddy Wyman's children. And we sit on that mud boat and go sailing back home. That was pretty interesting. And I can remember Mother making a snowsuit for me out of an old wool coat that she had. She tore it apart, or, cut the seams, cut the pieces apart. And I was so proud of that, but she saw to it that I was well dressed for the
Cold.
Mile and a half we had to walk in the cold.
Uphill both ways. All right.
Yeah, and the bigger kids looked after the littler kids. I felt well looked after because Dick and Charles and Marlon were all bigger than me.
Tell her about going to Florida and meeting Mars.
Okay, well, let's make a second one.
Oh my, I don't know if I can